welcome to the LTD Leadership Lean-In, where our goal is to help you lead like never before in your hotel and in your home. I'm Sam, your Vice President of Sales and Culture.
And I'm Richard. If you're new with us, we release a brand new teaching on the 1st and 15th of every single month. I would love to invite you to subscribe, and that way we'll send it directly to you.
We know that a lot of you are going over this with your teams, and I think that's really just brilliant, because when we learn together as a team, we grow together as a team. Ultimately, we'll have the same language, right, and the same experiences, and I think that's just really incredibly valuable. So I also want to say thank you to those of you who are sharing about this, inviting your coworkers to listen, on sharing on social media, sharing through email, however you want to get the message out. But we really do appreciate it, and we also appreciate it when you rate it and you review it. It's just really helpful for us.
Yes, and don't forget, you can also email us at ltdleanin@gmail.com. That's specifically for any questions you have about content we've already covered, suggestions on content we could cover in the future, or stuff that we could do better, because we appreciate your feedback. Mm-hmm. And before we get started on our topic today, where we'll learn about the art of giving helpful feedback, let's review the content from last month's episode.
Yes, so on our episode last
Hold on. Previously on LTD Leadership Lean-In.
Yeah, that's perfect. On the last episode, and actually, if you haven't watched the episode already, I want to encourage you possibly to pause right here, maybe go back and listen to the previous episode, or you can watch Richard's 5-minute recap, which is a nice short form version of the content. But if you haven't watched that, go ahead and do that. But I want to encourage you to take in that content before receiving this content, because I think it will really add a lot of value to what you're hearing today. But just as a refresher, let's remember that without honest and timely feedback, your personal and our organizational growth will always be limited. Why? Because we are blind, right, to so many different things about ourselves. We have no idea what we don't know, and our blind spots are all around us. So remember, feedback is everywhere. It's common, but helpful feedback is rare.
Yes, and as leaders, we're going to work to develop a culture of honest and helpful feedback. Why? Because your unwillingness to accept and give feedback will ensure your inability to achieve growth. Sam, remind me, what do we need to learn about receiving feedback?
Well, number one, we don't dread feedback, we crave feedback. Remember, feedback is the number one tool that we have to help us grow. So feedback is not something that we endure. Feedback is something that we embrace. Number two, we want to separate the do from the who. Yeah, separate the do from the who. Feedback that tells us how to improve can feel painful, right? Because oftentimes it feels like people are criticizing who we are, but that's really not true. The best feedback is all about what we do, not who we are. It's about actions and performance, not about identity. Whenever we find ourselves getting maybe defensive, right, we need to remember that that's the point where we might have to lean in, right? Because that trigger is oftentimes a cue that this is something maybe where I have a really, I have an opportunity to grow. And number three, we're going to ask clarifying questions. General questions rarely lead to helpful feedback. So when you hear something in a feedback session, right, that you don't fully like or you don't really understand, don't immediately tune that out. Instead, what we want to do is we want to train ourselves to say, tell me more, right? Help me understand. Remember to ask clarifying questions so that you can make the feedback really helpful and really create a plan to improve an action against the feedback that you receive.
Yeah, and then also remember to solicit the feedback before game day. So if you can get feedback before your big presentation, or before you send off that proposal, or before any big event that you have the opportunity of, go to your peers, go to your leaders, go to anybody who can give you some feedback on that, and get that before it's time to present. And that way we're not just getting feedback on the backside of performance and then really knowing where we can reflect on what we did wrong, but possibly using that feedback to improve ourselves before the event.
Yeah, I love this quote, and I can't really remember who to attribute it to right now. But it says, leaders who don't listen to others will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And I can't think of a worse fate for a leader.
Yeah, while it can be hard, listening to feedback shows value to those around us, and it just helps us get better. The bottom line is honest feedback is the difference between being a good leader and a great leader. Now let us dive into new content. Today we're going to talk about the art of giving feedback.
Yeah.
3 big things to talk about. Number 1 is when, number 2 is how, and the third is the who. So when, how, and who. At the most basic, these are 3 factors that truly matter when giving feedback.
Yeah, so the first thing, like Richard mentioned, is when. When you give feedback matters. So for some leaders, and unfortunately probably a lot of leaders, the only time that they're delivering feedback is that annual performance review. And what I want to tell you right now is that is probably months too late in the process. What we want to do is what Ed Batista, he's the co-author of the Harvard Business Review, Guides to Coaching Employees and Delivering Effective Feedback. What he says is make feedback normal, not a performance review. So the biggest win is to make feedback immediate and normal, so that when there's performance, there's feedback very, very quickly, right? Because what's evaluated gets improved.
Yeah, and it's making sure that the feedback is coming at the right time. When we say immediate, it doesn't mean right in the heat of the performance. For example, if a desk clerk was checking a guest in and they made a mistake that really didn't mess up anything or couldn't be corrected after the guest leaves, maybe waiting until after that. Because obviously, if I came to you in the middle of a performance, if you were in the middle of a concert playing your guitar and I came out and said, hey, you missed a couple notes 3 notes back while you're trying to still perform, you're not going to be able to. Or if you're in the middle of your shift, in the middle of the action, and I'm telling you, I'm watching you and you've been making a lot of mistakes and I'm going to keep watching you, you lose your confidence. But by finding them at the right moment afterwards, then we'll be able to give them the feedback, allow them to emotionally recover from that moment. They can emotionally recover before the feedback, and then we'll give them the feedback so that it'll work at that point.
Yeah. So again, we want to be wise about when we give feedback, but we do want to make sure that we're giving feedback as close to, and we're going to keep calling it a performance because a lot of our role in hospitality it's kind of like a performance, right? So we want to give that feedback as close to the performance as is wise, right? As leaders, we use wisdom to guide our actions. So most often, delivering feedback after that performance is best. But what we want to do occasionally is I want you to pay super careful attention to this part, but occasionally we might actually want to give public feedback in the moment. In other words, we may want to give feedback to someone in front of others, right? Especially when it's positive feedback, right? Because what you're doing is you're rewarding that person. You're showing them that you value them. You're helping everyone else see why that behavior was valuable. So positive feedback publicly really can be a teaching moment as well as an opportunity to honor that other person. Occasionally, though, right, we also want to give public feedback when it's corrective in nature. And I want to tell you why. Because you might actually be doing that person, the person that you're correcting, you may be actually doing them a favor by letting everyone else know that the issue has been resolved, right? And let me just be clear, this takes some finesse, okay? And if you don't do it right, it can hurt the other person. It can cause you to lose trust with your team. It can maybe make you look foolish. So it's super important that you take that you're very careful when you're doing it, but it really can have some added benefit when we have those situations arise.
Yeah, I know we've probably all heard the praise in public and criticize in private.
Right.
And for the most part, that is true. We want to make sure that that praise does happen in public. And when we're doing those real coaching sessions, those feedback sessions, we want to do in private. But I can think of a couple examples of when coaching in public is positive. The
Yeah.
first would be almost like an after action report. So if Sam and I were working together and Sam had made some pretty public errors that other people had made note of, maybe thinking, oh, that's how it's supposed to happen, or you know, is anything being done about this, that maybe I realized, well, I don't want to tell her about this in public. We talk about it, she agrees the best action moving forward, and then the next time we're in a public session, maybe I'd be like, yeah, you know, speaking of whatever hypothetical I'm talking about in this
Yeah.
scenario, Sam was having trouble with that, and we discussed that. And what was the solution we came up with that? And that way, Sam can almost do her own how this coaching session and shared it with the group,
Right.
so that it makes that coaching even more comfortable. Another less fun example is, let's say, you know, same example, Sam here,
Yes.
is just not. We're giving a morning meeting, and Sam is playing on her phone or being disruptive, doing
Maybe
something,
disrespectful.
interrupting me while I'm trying to talk. Um, and so maybe you think, oh, I'll address this after the fact, but really in that meeting, it could be very not just disruptive and turn people off of the message, but it could also let them know that that's okay, or at least it's tolerated, and take it off of it. So in those cases, that's probably something I would need to address right there. Still could do it in a tactful way of, hey Sam, do you mind if we discuss this later? Or hey Sam, I'm gonna need you to pay attention, but we can definitely have some time to talk about this one-on-one. Or just, hey, that attitude's not gonna be tolerated. Blah blah blah.
Blah blah blah. I'm sure you all be a little bit more articulated in the moment, but
Oh, they don't literally say blah blah blah?
no, they don't
Okay,
literally. So
got
don't take that as a quote. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, and yeah, those moments can be uncomfortable. And you have to be careful, because if you do it with the wrong heart, right, the wrong attitude, the wrong tone, or really the wrong spirit, you can devalue that person and, you know, kind of hurt everyone else in the process. But when done in the right spirit, right, with a coachable spirit, correcting somebody publicly can really be a teaching moment, and can occasionally do them a favor by letting their peers know that you know, whatever that situation was has been addressed, and it kind of can cease all of the potential chatter that may happen afterwards, right? So this is when you have to be wise as a leader, and you might not always get it right, but you do always want to have a humble and a right spirit towards that corrective commentary. So when you give feedback matters, right? And after the performance, as early as wise. So because when we that is really when people are most ready to learn. And I can think of, you know, examples with young children, right, and correcting their behavior. We always hear that, if you know, you always want to try and correct it as quickly as possible, so that it's fresh on their mind and it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so, you know, that's the when. The second thing that matters when you give the feedback, what I like to do is I like to define not only what is happening in a feedback conversation, but I also like to define what's not happening.
Yes, what's not happening. So I'd like to give you the source. I'm blanking again. I don't know what's going on.
Bibliography's in.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I can't remember where I read it. But in this book that I read, they talked about creating a climate of safety when delivering feedback. So what I want to do is, let's say we're sitting down, okay, and I'm gonna give you feedback. You, Richard, like if I come to you and I say, hey, can I see you in my office? You might get a little nervous, right? I can feel my heart kind of racing. You know, my stomach feels like, oh, all a mess. You might be thinking like, oh my goodness, what's she gonna say? You know, am I gonna lose my job? I don't know. Am I in trouble? And so as the leader, what you want to do is you want to immediately explain to them what is not happening, right? So hey, Richard, we're gonna have a chat right now, but don't worry, nobody's in trouble. Nobody's gonna get fired here. It's not a big deal, but this is just an opportunity that I recognize, and that's something that can help us grow, or something that we can do better. So you're immediately helping them calm down and put them in a position to actually receive the feedback that you're trying to deliver. An example that I can think of, like when you get an exam back from a professor or from a teacher, right? You want to find out what the grade is on it immediately. You want to know where you stand before you start reading all those comments. And so what we want to do is create that climate of safety for the people that we're giving feedback to by letting them know what is not happening. And when we're doing that, we're taking away all of those fears that they might have. We're taking those fears off the table so that they can breathe a sigh of relief, right? And they can say, okay, now I'm ready to receive the feedback.
Yeah, and there's not a one size fits all way of how to do this either, because it's based off of building these relationships with those that you're giving the feedback to. And the right time to deliver this feedback to certain people or how you do it. But the most important thing to get out of this is if you do it often, it becomes easier. If I never talk to somebody, if I never bring them back into my office, if I'm never giving them any sort of feedback, the one time I do, it's going to come off as harsh or difficult to take. But if I'm presenting this feedback regularly, it's less of a song and dance about that. It's okay. We're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
We're gonna get through this together. It's more of a hey, I just wanted to review some things.
Is that what you think
I don't know.
Probably.
Maybe the first time. But if you're doing it regularly, then yeah, it almost becomes a routine of, hey, let's go ahead and review a few of the check-ins I saw today, or let's go ahead and review some of your rooms that I inspected.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So again, when we're delivering feedback, we want to be, kind in heart and spirit and in attitude and in motives, right? Because this is going to come across in our body language. And we really want to show people that we care about them and that the feedback we're delivering is all about helping them improve. I love what John Maxwell says. He says, people may hear your words, but they feel your attitude, right? People might, they might hear your words, but they feel your attitude.
Yes. So we defined 3 categories of feedback in our last episode. Yeah. And so that was the whole ACE acronym: appreciation, coaching. Say that.
Sorry.
No,
I thought the pause was for me.
Oh, sorry. Good. And evaluation. Today we're going to focus on 2 of these 3 categories. Last time we discussed how we really need a balanced approach to all 3. But one thing I want to highlight is how it is important that at times, often appreciation is without coaching. And so why? So if every time we present the appreciation followed by the coaching, then it loses any of its pleasantries, right? And then it becomes a condition that I know when somebody's coming to me and saying, hey, Sam, you did a great job yesterday, but however, I would like you to, that it's not going to be appreciated. And even your appreciations are going to be taken negatively.
Yeah. I love the thought of appreciation culture, and I'd love to, maybe that's a future episode that we can, or a segment that we can talk about, is really how to develop a culture of appreciation within your organization. But I do think it's so important to make appreciation with, maybe without always constant coaching, a regular part of our culture. So many of your team members, they want to know that you notice their effort, right? That they're putting in. They want you to notice their hard work. They want you to notice their attention to detail. And if you don't ever say or show appreciation for their effort, they don't know where they stand. And I just want to say, you cannot assume that they know how much you appreciate them or how much you value them. So anytime that you think something good, I want to encourage you to say it, show it, write it down, send them a text, send them an email, just say something and be specific. Be specific as possible and appreciate as often as you can with feedback. We want to let appreciation stand on its own.
Yeah, I'm glad you even brought up the whole shooting a text. I've thought of that afterwards of a long day where I was stressed out and in my own head most of it, that I missed that opportunity. And I thought, a certain associate was just really just taking care of these things that I didn't need to worry about it. And because it wasn't a problem, it didn't get my focus that day. And just shot a simple, hey, I didn't get the chance to tell you earlier. I really noticed that you did this all day. And I truly thank you being part of the team or whatever you did. And the responses that I get from that is just so impactful, because you're sharing your emotion and you're being vulnerable with those people at that moment, that I think the appreciation is appreciated.
Yeah, I think you're right. And even though we were talking about, the when being important, don't discount the fact that just because you didn't do that appreciation, immediately after the performance or within the performance, it's never too late, right? You might be laying in bed recapping your day and going, oh my gosh, I don't know how I've made it through the day without this person. There's never a bad time, I think, to send that message. So
sorry. No, I was just gonna say, so just to recap, appreciation without coaching lets the appreciation be a clear win in their mind.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. A clear win.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So then when you're coaching, right, we want to try to keep our coaching conversations to 1 or 2 areas. In other words, I'm not going to come to somebody in a feedback session with like 15 different things that they can do to improve on, because that's probably going to overwhelm them and it's going to discourage them. So what I want to do is I want to pick the 1 or 2 most important areas that I think are really going to have the highest return. And I'm going to start there. Just, here's 1, 2 areas that I think that we can work on, so that person has a clear understanding of what they can do to improve. Then, of course, we want to, tell the truth. We want to be very specific about what we think that they can do to actually get better. So just like we talked about in the previous episode, we don't just say, Richard, you're not good with people, because that's not helpful feedback. It's feedback, but it's not helpful feedback, right? So you are going to tell them very specifically what it is, right? What that area is that they can improve upon. And then I think as a leader, one of the areas that you can add the most value in is tell them what they can do to improve on those things, right? So you might come in with a thought out plan, processes that they can put into motion to help them work on that area and improve in that area, right? You might suggest a book that they can read. You might suggest a mentor or a person that they can connect with, whether in our, within LTD or within their specific hotel, or even maybe just within our industry as a whole, because we all know that we can learn so much from just connecting with other people. You might suggest a training or a seminar, an assignment, right? You'll say to them, here's what I'm going to do to help you. But again, it's got to be really specific.
Yeah. And when you are providing this feedback and you're providing this valuable, specific feedback, just keep in mind of who you're talking to, that this is a person. And at the end of the day, you are giving them information about that they need to be doing something different. And that can be a sensitive area for everybody, especially when you're not doing it regularly and you're trying to get better about it. But we need to focus on how we would feel when we receive this feedback, but then more importantly, focus on the intention versus the actual impact or outcome of what happened here. I think most people genuinely want to do good and want to be good. There are exceptions to that in the world, right? But most people had the intent to do well. But if we focus on what their actions did resulted in the negative impact, share that information with them, and then focus on if their intention was this, what are some changes that they could make to reach their intention. Obviously, if they were that rarity of somebody who was just actually intending to have a negative impact, well, then you just don't want them on your team. You don't want them in your life. You don't want to have a relationship with that person.
Right.
Like, if that's the person and they're intentionally trying to sabotage, then you remove that.
Yeah.
But the generality is that most people have the good intent. So focus on how to reach the intent and avoid the negative impact.
Yeah. So again, although people's intentions may be good, or maybe even at the very least just a neutral intention, right? They had no intention at all. We want to show them and be clear about how their actions are actually impacting the organization, right? The hotel as a whole, or the people around them. So we want to be clear. We want to show them, right? Be specific about how their actions or even their inactions, no matter their intentions, are impacting those around them.
Yeah, for example, somebody who's often late to work. They may do a great job while they're there. They get everything done. They're great with the guests, great with their coworkers, but they're late every day. And that has an impact of, if they're responsible for relieving somebody, that gives somebody that uncertainty of what it is. If they're, those 5 minutes can be very painful when you're supposed to be off 5 minutes ago, because you don't know if it's going to be 5 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour. It also tells people that your time is more important to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not your intent. You just left a little bit later than you should have, but you're telling them that your time, that it doesn't matter that you're holding other people up. Or just the simple act of, crossing your arms when you're upset, telling people around you that you're just not in a good mood. Those may not have been their intent, but when we're giving them the specific feedback of, it's important that you're here on time because this is the impact of being late. While that might not have been your intent, this is what's happening.
Yeah. So again, people might say, that's not what I intended. When you're giving them that feedback, it's just super important that you help remind them that it doesn't matter what you intended. I think we said this earlier, perception is reality. The perception is from the team, from the group, right? That, you've made a different impact than what your original intentions were. And this really was the impact of your actions. And so we want to separate, like we said, their intentions from the impact. And that can really help people see how their actions impact others. I think we talked about it in the last episode. We talked a little bit about the 360 review that I had, where some of my behaviors had an unintended impression, right? Where, people's perception was a lack of humility. I didn't realize that. I was able to get that feedback, but I was surprised by it. It wasn't my intention. My intention was different than the impact I was having. And so the feedback helped me rectify and change some of those behaviors. So I think that's just like a specific example of how that works, from a feedback perspective. So again, we've learned that when you give feedback matters, and how you give feedback matters. And then lastly, we want to talk about who is giving feedback and why that matters.
Yeah, so if you're receiving feedback and you don't like or respect the person who's giving the feedback, it's going to be very difficult to receive. And you're probably not going to really even listen to it or make any changes. And we all know that some people honestly are more difficult to receive from than others. And what you want to do is remember that they have a very different perspective, and different is valuable.
Yeah.
A different perspective is very valuable because where they sit determines what they see.
Yeah.
The person at the front desk sees things differently than a person in the executive office, and the chief engineer sees things differently, or even a room differently than a room attendant or a housekeeping supervisor would.
Right.
And where you sit determines what you see. So the most important factor is to let them know that you care about them as a person. When they win, you want to celebrate the loudest. When you're coaching them, you want to celebrate the improvements that they are making along the way.
Yeah. Again, as the leader, you set the tone. So, for us to create a culture of feedback within the organization, we have to be receptive to feedback. Nothing affects your organization more than the leader's willingness to seek and receive feedback. So if you want a great feedback culture, you really have to be the first one to go and seek it out, and you have to be willing to receive it from others. The higher you rise, just realistically in an organization, whether in your hotel or in any organization, the higher you rise, the more difficult it is to get the truth out of people, because the more, we'll call it, perceived power that you have, the harder it is to get people to be honest and truthful, because maybe they have, they don't want to give you feedback out of fear of repercussion, or they don't want to offend you. You're their leader. And so it's really important that to create that culture of feedback, that you as the leader are seeking feedback from those that you are giving feedback to, so that it's more of a dialogue and they feel more comfortable receiving feedback from you, because they also know that you are someone who values feedback and also receives feedback.
Yeah, and it was intentional that we did an episode on receiving feedback before giving it.
Yeah.
Because you cannot have you cannot have it start with giving feedback. You need to show that you're willing to receive it. You have to seek out feedback. You as a leader need to seek it, because if you don't seek and receive feedback, your team will never do it themselves. And one of the most important things you can do for your organization is to be the one that seeks it, the one that illustrates that feedback is a gift.
Yeah.
And that's not just a slogan that I
No.
say sarcastically. Feedback is a gift, in that if you seek it, if you ask for it, if you show appreciation for it, if you make the changes after receiving it, then your team will, and it'll make the whole team get better.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and review some of the factors in giving feedback, the most critical things in giving feedback. When you give it matters, right? So for some leaders, the most common time is that annual performance review. And what we have learned together, right, is that is not enough, and it's oftentimes way too late. So we need to normalize delivering feedback on a very regular and consistent basis. How you give it, how you deliver feedback matters, right? We want to start by clearly defining what's happening and what's not happening. We're going to create a climate of safety and really help people understand, you're not in trouble here. We're just doing this to help you get better. This is not a reflection of you as a person. This is really about your actions, or potentially about some ways that you're doing certain things that we think we can just improve upon. Maybe it's already good, but it can be great. And then, of course, who gives feedback matters. It's difficult to receive feedback from someone that we don't respect. So, what we're going to do is we're going to communicate with care. As a leader, I believe it's very important that you have to earn the right to be candid with somebody. And that's why it's so important that we work as leaders to develop that emotional, relational collateral with somebody, so that we can earn the right to be candid with them, so that they know when we're delivering that feedback that we have their best interest in mind, and that they can receive this from us because they know our heart is for them, and that we want what's best for them, and that we wouldn't be saying this if we didn't feel that it would help them improve. So again, who gives it matters. And I'll go back to that John Maxwell quote that I love so much. People might hear your words, but they absolutely feel your attitude.
Absolutely. And when we can, remember, we're going to appreciate, when we can appreciate, we're going to make sure that it's a clean gift, that win is clean, and that it doesn't have that however, but constantly. When coaching, we're going to keep it focused on the one, maybe two different areas, the most important areas with the highest impact, so that we can focus on those and make a difference.
Yeah.
And then And then don't do the I know you didn't mean to, but here's how your actions are. So when we've separated that impact from the intention, we go ahead and acknowledge that with statements like, I know you didn't mean to, but here's how your actions impacted the people around you. And so that way they can feel the feedback and it can be valuable.
Yeah. So again, who gives that feedback matters. And, it is difficult to receive feedback from someone that we don't respect, but we have to remember that where we sit determines what we see. Where we sit determines what we see. We're going to help the receiver of the feedback know that from where we sit, this is exactly how we see things. And this is why we think that this can help you get better. And again, as a leader, we set the tone. You set the tone. There's nothing more important than you seeking out feedback. By modeling this, right, we model behavior as leaders. It can become a regular part of your hotel's culture, and this will strengthen the team more than you could ever imagine.
Yeah, and as a reminder, as we kind of wrap up here,
Wrapping up.
all right, as a reminder, the final but most important step in any of this is reviewing what you've learned today with your team. So check out the downloadable leadership resource guide. Call into action those application questions in there and use what you've learned today to make your team better. I guess that's it.
That's it.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We will see you on the next episode.
Yeah.
And let's
lean in and get better together.